Okay, this is the first video in Unit 8. Time period is 1945 to 1989. And what we're focusing on in this unit is how the Cold War and decolonization affected the world. So the topic and our essential question for this lesson is, what was the context for the Cold War and decolonization? So by the end of this video, you should be able to explain the context of the Cold War and decolonization, and you should be able to show your understanding by planning a context statement. So to walk you through this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define two key developments during this time period, the Cold War and decolonization. Then we're going to kind of review context and kind of walk through how to plan a context statement. So before we begin the actual lesson, I want to do this activity. I'm going to show you two political cartoons, and I want you to focus on, one, what is the main idea of the political cartoon, and two, what evidence supports this. From looking at these two political cartoons, we'll understand what we're talking about within this unit. So the first political cartoon is this one. Take a second to identify the main idea and the evidence that supports it. You can press pause. Okay, welcome back. So this obviously focuses on the destruction of colonies in Africa. And the reason why we say that is colonialism, imperialism, is presented as a building in the European Greek style, and how the African who's enslaved, shown by the chains, is essentially pushing the building down. And when the building falls, the parts that remain will be independent nations such as Rhodesia, South Africa, Portuguese Guiana, Mozambique, and Angola. So this is one of the things we're going to focus on this unit, decolonization, how the former colonists of imperialism in Africa, Asia, and Latin America threw off the influence of their imperializing nations and created brand new nations. Here's the second one. Now remember, I'm asking you to identify the main idea and the supporting evidence. So take a second to study this and to see what you come up with. Press pause now. Okay, welcome back. So the main idea about this political cartoon is that the United States, represented by Uncle Sam, and the Soviet Union, not only represented by the bear, but the flag in the background, are not very happy with each other. You can see that both are eyeing each other, not only with anger, but suspicion, that they're both threatening to backhand the other. So this obviously is about the Cold War. But a little bit deeper, we see that the Soviet, their main plan of fighting is through aggression, through threats, as you can see by the bear's claws out and how the bear is bigger. But Uncle Sam's a little bit different. Okay, he is a little bit smaller, but he also holds a bag of money. And so this is about the Cold War, the second thing we're going to talk about in this unit. So when we talk about this unit is about two main things. From 1945 to 1989, the world experiences the Cold War, and the world goes through decolonization. So the Cold War was the state of diplomatic hostility between the United States and the Soviet Union. We have to say diplomatic hostility because nowhere on the earth did these two nations actually fight. Rather, they fought through other people, through espionage and things like that. This is going to be a war over ideology, both political ideology and economic ideology, and their desire to spread their ideology to new worlds. And it was a total war. Now, decolonization, on the other hand, is the independence of former colonial possessions. And this takes place in two ways, one through negotiation and two through rebellion. So it looks like these two things are happening at the same time, but are not connected. But here's the connection. Number one, both the the United States of America and the Soviet Union were very anti-colony. And number two, as these nations became independent through negotiation or rebellion, they were recruited to adopt the ideology of either the Soviet Union or the United States. So, this is the connection between the two and why this is defined as a period in history. So, when we talk about the context of the Cold War and decolonization, we have to establish the global, either what's going on beforehand, what's going on during, or what this starts. And the easiest way is to kind of talk about what leads up to it. We have to talk about the local, which is some aspect of the Cold War and or decolonization, and we've got to make a connection between the two. So to establish the context of this unit, we have to answer some questions. One, what was the world like in 1914? Well, 1914, we see that this is the start of the First World War, and we see that we have very strong European nations, especially France and Great Britain, who have massive amounts of colonies, square miles, and population under their control. That to protect this and to win this competition, they've militarized. They've also created alliances and are motivating their people through nationalism. So this is going to lead to the world wars. And the world wars are going to have a catastrophic effect on both the strong nations and the imperialized nations. For example, to motivate the people to join the war effort in their colonies, each strong nation promised to begin to discuss the process of self-government with each. Unfortunately, at the end of World War I, that was not fulfilled. Again, at the start of World War II, this also was promised. And so at the end of the war, essentially, people were ready for their independence. On the other hand, Britain and France being the leaders, and Germany being the leader of the enemy side, both suffered catastrophic economic and people losses during both wars and were exhausted. So when we look at 1945, we have two remaining powerful nations, the United States and the Soviet Union. And the reason why they're powerful is because, number one, they're the military powers of the world. The United States, on one hand, has the atomic bomb, and on the flip side, the Soviet Union is a military juggernaut. Secondly, the United States and the Soviet Union are two economic powers, having massive industrial output. Britain, France, Germany, and the other old imperial nations, well, they've been hit very hard by the warfare and are basically declining in power. Secondly, because decolonization was promised two times, and the realization by both the United States and the Soviet Union that decolonization was a cause of this period of conflict, we're now setting the stage for decolonization. So when we talk about the context for the Cold War and decolonization, we have to talk about the effects of not only the World War I and World War II on the strong nations, but also their effects on former colonies. This sets the context for any question that we write about the Cold War and decolonization.